If you're not sleeping well last night, you're not gonna be 100% in the training in the morning, you know. That's why discipline is the most important things. Everybody have same things, gyms, coaches, sparring partners, but who is a discipline more, that guy have more success, you know. It's discipline, it's not about me, it's about it's all about my team, you know. What our coach Abdul Manap give us all his life when he was with us, just discipline, you know, come on time, like focusing, always training, you know, because one of the things, you can come to the training, sleep well in the morning, you can come, and training is beginning, and you still thinking about some business, some other stuff. You're not 100% in the gym, you know. That's why even myself right now, like all like small businesses what I have people who take care, like my older brother, some of the guy, but I don't think about this business. I don't like check how it's working, how it's going, because I have to focusing in training, you know.
Islam Makhachev steps up to welterweight at UFC 330, a technical breakdown against Garry. Islam Makhachev's move to welterweight at UFC 330 represents a calculated shift in his competitive timeline. The lightweight title defense record sits as his immediate legacy marker, but the division's depth plateau forced a natural escalation. Garry presents not just a size mismatch in Makhachev's favor, but a stylistic puzzle that requires specific mechanical solutions. Garry's length and movement patterns create a genuine spacing problem for Islam's primary attack vectors. The sparring footage and camp adjustments reveal how Islam's team identified timing and distance manipulation as the critical variables, not raw physical measurements. This fight becomes a study in how Islam translates his grappling dominance when his opponent maintains a significant height and reach advantage. The welterweight division's structural differences demand Islam operate with tighter margin tolerances than he required at lightweight. Garry's physical profile creates unconventional spacing problems. Garry measures as a legitimate 170-pounder with exceptional length. The reported fights show Garry operating at 181 pounds backstage weight, significantly lighter than the typical welterweight competitor Islam has faced. This creates a specific mechanical problem. Garry's height and reach exist without the compensatory power distribution that naturally accompanies heavier welterweights. His jab operates from maximum distance, and his kick selection relies on timing and snap rather than raw load. Makhachev's prior opponents at lightweight rarely maintained this functional length without either committing to clinch engagement or settling into stationary striking positions. Garry's footwork pattern suggests someone comfortable creating and recreating distance through lateral movement rather than backward stepping. Islam must close distance more deliberately, which extends the approach phase of his entries and exposes him to Garry's timing-based counters. The size discrepancy Garry possesses differs fundamentally from heavier opponents. It's length-based rather than mass-based, requiring different pressure application mechanics. Makhachev's entry mechanics must compensate for extended range. Islam's primary success at lightweight stems from controlled, methodical entries that collapse distance before opponents establish clean positioning. His level changes initiate from relatively compact positions, allowing him to maintain head position and hand placement throughout the descent. Against Garry's length, Islam cannot employ identical entry timing. The jab arrives from further away, requiring Islam to either absorb more strikes during approach or alter his entry angle to account for extended range. Garry's ability to reset vertical position while maintaining lateral spacing means Islam's basic chain sequences lose effectiveness if he doesn't adjust initial positioning. The training camp footage reveals Islam experimenting with lower body attack initiations, leg kicks and feints designed to manipulate Garry's knee bend and knee position. These attacks serve dual purposes. They compress Garry's available distance and create reaction angles that Islam exploits through subsequent entries. Islam's entries at welterweight require patience in the positioning phase before explosive level change execution. The approach distance forces Islam into longer setups, but his timing advantage remains intact if he uses the space efficiently. Footwork patterns define the fight's rhythmic structure. Both fighters operate with fundamentally different footwork strategies, and this creates the fight's primary mechanical tension. Garry relies on consistent lateral movement with frequent direction changes, a pattern designed to frustrate pressure and maintain perpendicular positioning relative to Islam. His stances remain relatively upright, allowing him to pivot quickly and reset his distance from multiple angles. Islam's footwork compresses space through forward progression, typically moving straight into opponents while establishing angular control. His stance accommodates lower center of gravity and quicker level changes compared to Garry's more vertical setup. When these footwork patterns interact, Garry maintains range through pure lateral work, while Islam penetrates space through straight-line pressure. The sparring observations from camp note that Usman Nurmagomedov's timing complements Islam's pressure, suggesting Islam's team prioritized drilling against consistent lateral movement patterns. Garry's direction changes become exploitable when Islam establishes diagonal pressure rather than strictly forward momentum. Islam's footwork efficiency at welterweight will depend on maintaining constant forward presence without overcommitting to single directions. Each time Garry pivots, Islam regains the initiative for immediate entry if he reads the direction change correctly. Clinch control becomes Islam's primary operational zone. Clinch represents where Islam neutralizes Garry's length advantage most effectively. Garry's reach functions optimally at distance. His jab and kicks operate from positions where clinch engagement becomes impossible. Once Islam establishes wrist control, Garry's primary offensive tools lose mechanical function. Islam's clinch work involves immediate collar tie establishment, which controls Garry's posture and restricts his ability to create space through upright movement. Plum clinch control, Islam's preferred position, compresses Garry's vertical space, negating the height advantage that creates jab and kick setup distance. From the collar tie, Islam can drive Garry backward or sideways, controlling direction while digging for underhook transition. Garry's defensive strategy inside the clinch requires either breaking Islam's wrist control or immediately seeking positional changes to reset distance. The footage from Islam's training camp shows dedicated drilling against lateral clinch pressure, suggesting Garry's likely response involves constant motion rather than positional holds. Islam's clinch-dominant positioning also sets up knee strikes, body work, and immediate takedown attempts from plum position. The clinch becomes Islam's bridge between the distance management phase and his ground attack initiation. Every successful clinch entry represents Islam shutting down 70% of Garry's striking arsenal. Takedown entries require specific timing windows. Islam's takedown success has historically emerged from position rather than explosive power alone. He identifies when opponents commit weight or settle stance, then exploits timing over strength. Against Garry's lighter build and lateral movement pattern, timing windows become narrower but more definable. Garry's vertical stance and frequent direction changes mean his weight distribution shifts regularly. Each lateral step, each knee bend. Each base reset creates a brief moment where takedown entries gain mechanical efficiency. Islam's team drilling against Usman, a fighter with exceptional timing, suggests they've prioritized identifying these windows rather than increasing explosive power for entry. Islam's double-leg takedown mechanics remain his foundation, but the execution must account for Garry potentially leaving his base open during pivots rather than creating closed defensive positioning. Single-leg attacks become more viable when Garry extends a leg during lateral movement, particularly when Islam establishes underhook control from clinch first. The transition from clinch control to takedown attempt defines Islam's most efficient path. A direct takedown attempt without preceding clinch work allows Garry to create space vertically or turn his hips away. Islam's entry timing at welterweight requires patience, waiting for the moment Garry's movement pattern creates vulnerability rather than forcing entries through raw pressure. Positional wrestling controls round pacing and fatigue. Once Islam secures takedown position, positional wrestling becomes the mechanism through which he wears Garry down. Garry's reported defensive grappling remains his weakest technical area, though never finishing suggests baseline competence. Islam's positional wrestling involves constant micro-movements, adjusting posture, switching grips, creating pressure vectors, designed to exhaust defenders through accumulated strain rather than dramatic position changes. From top position, Islam applies pressure while remaining unpredictable in his immediate direction. Garry must stay reactive, constantly defending against potential submission entries, positional transitions, or continued pressure. This reactive stance requires more muscular expenditure than defensive positioning allows. Islam's ground and pound strategy doesn't rely on knockout power. Instead, measured strikes combined with positional pressure create mental pressure for defending opponents. Each ground sequence becomes a compounding fatigue factor, particularly when Islam sequences multiple rounds of takedown entries. Garry's striking cardio differs from ground warfare cardio, and extended time on his back accumulates metabolic debt that carries into subsequent rounds. Islam's positional control methodology, rather than rapid submission hunting, allows him to manage pace while controlling Garry's energy expenditure. The later rounds become progressively more difficult for Garry as positional wrestling accumulates damage and fatigue. This pacing advantage represents Islam's primary path to maintaining welterweight championship status against longer opponents. Submission chains from guard pressure. Islam's guard pressure creates unique submission opportunities that emerge from his pressure application rather than pure leg lock mechanics. His guard pressure involves establishing grip control while maintaining upper body connection, preventing Garry from creating useful distance. From here, Islam threads the needle for arm triangle attacks or maintains collar tie pressure that restricts Garry's base and breathing. The arm triangle represents Islam's highest percentage submission from top position, but guard pressure sets up these opportunities rather than direct attacks. Garry's height creates specific vulnerability to collar tie submissions from guard bottom. His longer neck combined with Islam's arm triangle mechanics creates mechanical disadvantage. Islam's guard work emphasizes constant micro-transitions, adjusting hip position, shifting arm placement, maintaining pressure angles that don't allow Garry clean exits. Each transition attempt by Garry becomes exploitable if Islam reads the direction change correctly. The training camp footage emphasizes timing against Usman, who likely represents a significant timing threat from guard position. Islam's submission attacks emerge from positional dominance rather than desperation. He threads submissions only when Garry's defensive framework has already been compromised by positional pressure. This controlled approach to submission hunting reduces Garry's defensive guessing, making it harder for him to anticipate attacks. The guard work becomes suffocation-based rather than limb targeting, using Garry's own frame to generate submission mechanics. Leg kick setups manipulate stance and knee position. Islam's leg kick application serves mechanical functions beyond surface-level damage accumulation. Each leg kick targets Garry's stance structure, forcing minor adjustments to knee position and weight distribution. Accumulated leg kicks compress Garry's movement efficiency, slowing his directional changes and lateral footwork. Garry's reliance on quick pivots becomes compromised when his lead leg absorbs damage. The simple act of pushing off that leg becomes painful and mechanically restrictive. Islam's leg kick timing windows occur when Garry establishes forward weight or completes lateral movement. These temporal windows allow Islam to land leg kicks with limited defensive counter opportunity. The body kick functions similarly. Islam targets Garry's ribcage to compress his breathing and punish forward-leaning posture. Body kicks also disrupt Garry's clinch defense by creating space compression that makes evasion more difficult. Islam's lower body attack strategy compounds over rounds. First-round leg kicks might represent minor concerns, but accumulated damage by round 3 severely restricts Garry's available movement options. This manipulation of stance efficiency allows Islam's entries to function with less distance compensation. Garry finds himself unable to move laterally with same precision, making Islam's forward pressure increasingly difficult to escape. The leg kick strategy transforms the fight's rhythm. Islam creates the conditions for clinch work and takedown entries by first reducing Garry's ability to avoid them through footwork. Pressure application without excessive aggression. Islam's pressure operates through calculated forward movement rather than wild aggression. This distinction matters mechanically because measured pressure maintains positioning and posture control, while aggressive rushing often forces Islam into compromised positions. Against Garry's length, controlled pressure allows Islam to occupy space and minimize Garry's ability to create distance through lateral work. Each forward step by Islam forces Garry backward or sideways, either direction reducing Garry's comfort zone. The pressure works because Islam maintains defensive coverage. He protects his head while moving forward, preventing Garry from landing clean counters during approach. Garry's striking becomes more difficult when his distance management gets compressed by consistent forward movement combined with defensive positioning. Islam's pressure also eliminates Garry's ability to counter-wrestle. Aggressive opponents typically shoot takedowns when pressured, but Islam's controlled approach prevents these desperate attempts. The sparring footage indicates Islam practiced against Usman's timing, suggesting his team prioritized maintaining positional integrity during pressure application. Measured pressure allows Islam to establish grips during clinch engagement rather than arriving in compromised positions. This technical pressure strategy differs from aggressive brawling. It's precision-based positioning manipulation rather than raw forward force. Over 3 rounds, measured pressure compounds Garry's frustration as his distance management tools become progressively less effective. Garry's defensive grappling vulnerabilities. While Garry never takes finishes, his grappling defense operates from a fundamentally reactive position. He lacks the wrestling pedigree that competitive grapplers develop, making his defense instinctive rather than systematic. This distinction becomes critical against Islam's organized grappling system. Garry's escape attempts likely emphasize sheer athletic effort, explosive movements designed to create separation and reset. Islam's positional control frustrates these explosive escapes by maintaining constant pressure that limits explosive outlet opportunities. Garry's height initially creates defensive advantages because Islam must work harder to establish control positions. However, once Islam establishes dominant position, Garry's length becomes a liability. His limbs create extension opportunities for submissions, and his larger frame requires more effort to maintain underneath Islam. Garry's defensive grappling shows competence against wrestlers with limited offensive vocabulary, but Islam's multi-directional attack angles, arm triangle, leg lock entries, positional transitions, create constant decision-making demands. Reactive defense becomes increasingly difficult when offense presents multiple simultaneous threats. Garry's reported weight disadvantage, 11-pound overnight gain versus Islam's typical 20-plus pound overnight gains, means his defensive strength decreases as rounds progress. Strength-dependent defense fails against sustained pressure, and Islam operates specifically to create these sustained pressure conditions. The lack of finishing means Garry survives, but survival becomes exhausting when facing Islam's relentless positional manipulation. Islam's defensive grappling exploitation plan appears designed to frustrate Garry through constant pressure rather than seeking clean submissions. Breathing and posture control create submission momentum. Islam's stranglehold entries focus on restricting breathing and creating panic, psychological pressure that compounds physical submission mechanics. The arm triangle doesn't require explosive power if breathing gets restricted before Garry initiates strong defensive positioning. Islam's collar tie control from clinch already restricts Garry's neck area, making subsequent submission entries mechanically simpler. Posture control amplifies this advantage. Islam compresses Garry's upper body through clinch positioning, reducing Garry's ability to straighten his posture or create the space necessary for defensive hand placement. Each position change Islam executes tightens the submission framework incrementally. Garry's psychological state becomes relevant here. As rounds progress and breathing becomes consistently restricted, desperation increases. This desperation often leads to mistakes in defensive positioning, creating openings for cleaner submission entries. Islam's ground control methodology emphasizes this breathing and posture manipulation over athletic explosion. The sustained pressure creates cardio stress that accumulates independent of round duration. Garry's larger frame means he requires more oxygen, making breathing restriction particularly effective against him. Islam's submission hunting emerges from this foundation. Once breathing gets compromised and posture breaks down, submission entries become inevitable. This approach explains why Islam's submission success appears inevitable against longer opponents. The positional dominance creates physiological disadvantage that exceeds pure technical skill gaps. Round pacing strategy demands specific entry timing. Islam's round pacing requires multiple takedown entries to accumulate positional control time. 3 first-round takedowns with 2-minute control periods doesn't equal 9 minutes of control. It requires strategic sequencing throughout the fight. Islam likely initiates his most aggressive takedown attempts in round 2, after Garry settles into round 1 and makes initial adjustments. The second round becomes Islam's pressure establishment phase, where he forces Garry's defensive game plan to become reactive rather than proactive. Garry enters round 3 potentially already fatigued from cumulative pressure, making Islam's round 3 takedown entries significantly easier. Islam's pacing suggests patience in round 1, establishing distance management against Garry's movement, aggression in round 2, maximal takedown entries and clinch pressure, and control in round 3, maintaining dominant positions while managing remaining energy. This 3-round strategy differs from aggressive finisher approaches because it prioritizes control accumulation over quick submission hunting. Garry's durability means Islam might not finish, but round pacing designed to maximally exhaust Garry sets up potential round 4 and 5 dominant control if extended rounds occur. The training camp focus on timing against Usman suggests Islam practiced identifying when Garry's energy drops relative to his movement efficiency. That timing becomes the signal for Islam to escalate takedown entry attempts. Understanding these sequential pressure applications explains Islam's historical finishing rate. His opponents fatigue into vulnerable positions rather than defending from stable, fresh positions. Clinch escape attempts create predictable entry angles. Garry's most likely clinch defense involves immediately seeking distance and resetting position. This escape-based strategy creates predictable patterns that Islam exploits. Each time Garry attempts to break Islam's clinch control, he commits to specific directional movement, typically creating space through backward stepping or lateral pivots. Islam reads these escape attempts and initiates takedowns into the movement direction Garry has already established. A fighter escaping backward into Islam's forward pressure becomes vulnerable to driving takedowns. A fighter pivoting laterally into Islam's directional control gets caught between competing movement patterns. These predictable escape angles allow Islam to initiate takedowns from superior positioning. Garry essentially cooperates with his own takedown by attempting to escape clinch control. The training footage likely captured Islam drilling against these specific escape sequences. Usman simulating Garry's escape timing, Islam drilling takedown entry angles that exploit each escape direction. Garry's tactical limited grappling means he lacks the varied escape options that accomplished grapplers develop. He likely depends on the same escape patterns repeatedly, making them increasingly predictable as Islam identifies them. By round 2, Islam anticipates Garry's clinch escape timing and enters takedowns before Garry fully commits to escape attempt. This read-and-react advantage becomes compounding. Garry's frustration with failed escapes increases desperation, which actually makes patterns more predictable. Islam's clinch control strategy thus functions as entry setup mechanism rather than terminal offensive position. Cardio durability favors Islam across extended rounds. Islam's cardio demands differ fundamentally from Garry's reported training emphasis. Islam conditions specifically for ground warfare cardio, muscular endurance, breathing pattern regulation during positional pressure, and recovery between explosive efforts. Garry conditions primarily for striking, footwork efficiency, rotational movement, and rapid direction changes. These different cardio preparations become increasingly relevant as rounds progress and recovery windows compress. Islam's ground-based cardio allows him to maintain pressure intensity even when striking opportunities diminish. Garry's striking cardio means extended ground exchanges create accumulating metabolic debt beyond his conditioning specialization. Rounds 2 and 3 amplify this cardio disparity as Islam's repeated takedown entries force Garry to repeatedly defend from bottom position, an exhausting scenario for someone conditioned for striking rather than grappling survival. Islam's breathing efficiency on the mat prevents the panic-based breathing that compromises defensive integrity. Garry's potential inefficient breathing in extended bottom positions creates openings for submission attacks. The cumulative round pacing strategy depends entirely on Islam's superior ground cardio. He enters each new round with fresher energy for continuation, while Garry accumulates fatigue from both striking first round and ground warfare second round. By round 3, this cardio disparity becomes visually apparent. Islam moves with precision and aggression, while Garry shows reduced movement velocity and positional adjustment speed. Islam's welterweight move doesn't significantly change these cardio mechanics. His ground-based conditioning translates across weight classes more easily than Garry's striking-dependent model. The longer rounds against bigger opponents typically benefit Islam specifically because his ground cardio exceeds opponents' available cardio for extended bottom position defense. Submission success probability increases with each round. Islam's submission attacks don't arrive randomly, they emerge from systematically degraded defensive positions. Garry's defensive grappling handles round 1 submission threats because he arrives fresh and executes desperate escapes efficiently. Round 2 submission attempts face a defender who's already fatigued from first round pressure and becomes more vulnerable to breathing-based submission mechanics. Round 3 submission attempts occur against a defender whose reactive escape attempts have slowed measurably. Each submission opportunity Islam creates becomes more likely to succeed than the previous attempt because Garry's defensive capacity has declined. This explains why extended round fights often produce submissions in later rounds, not because of technical breakthrough, but because of cumulative fatigue progression. Islam's submission success rate at UFC 330 likely depends on round length. Quick decisions reduce submission probability because Islam never exhausts Garry sufficiently. Extended rounds increase submission probability as Garry's defensive capacity degrades beyond critical thresholds. The training camp videos showing Islam's measured approach to submission hunting suggest his team prioritizes establishing dominant positions before submission attempts, ensuring higher success probability when attempts arrive. Garry's never-finished status means Islam must sustain pressure longer than against previous opponents, but the mathematical fatigue progression remains identical. Round 3 becomes Islam's highest probability finish window because Garry's defensive system has degraded maximally while Islam maintains functional pressure ability. Understanding this temporal progression explains Islam's finishing record not as technical dominance, but as systematic fatigue management over time.